Welcome to Sustainable Stock, Reviving Legacy Genetics, the podcast that delves into the power of traditional cattle genetics and the ranchers bringing them back. We're returning to the tried and true practices that prioritize what truly works on the ranch. Each episode, we'll talk to ranchers who are rediscovering the methods that built strong, resilient, efficient, and fertile herds in the 1960s and 70s. These breeders are blending the best of the past with practical solutions for today's ranching world. Whether you're passionate about the future of ranching or curious about heritage genetics, this podcast is for you. Presented by Boss Sires. Tune in as we reconnect with the roots of the herd. Here's your host, Patrick Powers.
Hi, and welcome back to Sustainable Stock. Today I'm visiting with Matt Robbins, who's here representing a true family effort. The Robbins family started rethinking how cattle and land worked together back in the late 90s, when his dad began experimenting with electric fencing and rotational grazing. Over the years, they've kept learning, refining, and adapting, eventually discovering Mashona genetics and connecting with Johann Zietsman, which helped take their program even further. Matt, thank you for joining us today. Please tell us a little bit about your family's journey and their approach and what started taking shape on your ranch.
Hi, Patrick. It's great to be with you today. So my family, the original plot of land was purchased around 1961. So we've been in the game for a long time, and we've seen a lot of different things come and go during that time span. We were very much to the core a conventional cattle operation for a long time. We cut hay all summer and then fed hay all winter. We had registered animals. We did show stock till the 90s. We've tried many different breeds of cattle to find something that works in our particular environment. And we've seen a lot of fads come and go. And we started doing regenerative practices in the 90s. My dad was kind of self-taught at that point. He didn't have the resources of the internet and such at that time. So we started by just putting up a little electric fence. And over time, as he saw changes, he started to get a little more aggressive with the reach-in efforts. And it eventually led us to the Johann Zietsman and Mashona cattle and ultra-high density grazing. And it's led us to where we are today.
That's perfect. Well, I've got to ask, let's just highlight exactly how conventional we're talking. You talked about the hay and the act of harvesting and how often you were feeding it. What other things were present that you would say y'all have broke ties with?
Sure. So if you envision the typical commercial cattle operation, where we would spend, all summer cutting hay and storing it, just to turn around at basically into summer and start feeding hay all the way up until the first bite of green grass in spring. And on top of that, we would have to feed expensive inputs, and it wasn't a sustainable system. So we had to put things on the land to, nitrogen and chicken litter, and just to keep the system going. It's continuous inputs all the time. And my dad started seeing that, hey, this isn't working out for us financially. This doesn't make sense anymore. And he started trying to find a different way in the 90s. And that's what led him to regenerative practices and trying to decrease inputs.
Okay. Well, that was my next question. Where did the questioning of mainstream really come about? Was it genetics first and then operation, or was it management and then the genetics to follow?
It started from a profitability standpoint, honestly. Everything kept getting more expensive and the margins were just less and less. So it kind of ended up being a twofold approach where management and genetics tied together on the thing. And by decreasing our inputs and going to a more regenerative way, it allowed our profitability to increase. And along with that management change, we also needed to change in genetics as well. So that's when we started looking for something that really truly fits into our environment and our management. And since the 60s, we've tried basically everything under the sun, genetics-wise, because we hadn't realized just exactly what we'd gotten ourselves into. At one point, Granddad, he even tried beefalo, This is an experiment,
So kind of
and
just
that's
following
just,
the fads for a minute there, huh?
yeah. I mean, we've seen a lot of things come and go. We raised registered Simmental limousine, and we did conventional show genetics for a while, and then that was kind of the show genetics is, I think, really kind of started to break the camel's back and put us into looking for something that really worked for us, because those show genetics don't work on a commercial cattle operation at all. And that's kind of what really, I think, kind of tipped the scale and started Dad looking towards a more profitable approach that kind of worked with nature instead of working against it.
Yeah. I hate that statement brought a smile to my face.
Well, I'm sure it's going to bring some smiles and also some frowns too. So,
Well, so with y'all's experience in genetics and with these mindful shifts in your father and your grandfather, well, your father's management change, what were the staples of change he was looking for within the genetics? He was already making these changes in his approach to management of the land. What were the needs that weren't met?
yeah. So, as Dad started initially with the cell grazing, and so I need to back up a little bit. Our calving dates were spread out. So we had what typical most guys have is two calving seasons, and they're long calving seasons. You have a spring and then you have a fall, winter, and there's almost an overlap because the seasons are so long.
Okay.
So as Dad started kind of bringing those a little bit tighter and the cell grazing a little more intense on the cell grazing, excuse me, as we started to get the cell grazing tighter, he started to notice that we're having some issues, especially with heat and humidity adaptation. And our Angus Simmental and losing Simmental, excuse me, losing Angus cross Angus at the time, they were really struggling with heat and humidity in the summer. And it really put a damper on how we were grazing cattle in the warmer months of the year. And that's what started us looking for animals that were really, truly fit for our particular environment.
Well, I hate to break in, but I've actually done a poor job as a host. We didn't highlight where you're at.
Yeah. So I am in Mena, Arkansas. That's southwest Arkansas. We're in a higher rainfall environment. The soils are naturally more acidic leaning, and we are pretty hot in the summer. It's not unusual to have days that are 110 plus. And it's also a very humid environment as well. And we don't get a lot of nighttime relief either in regards to the humidity. So it's pretty muggy and sticky uh, when summertime hits, and that puts a lot of stress on the animals. And you need an animal that has a high degree of humidity and heat tolerance in this environment, especially for how we ended up grazing.
I imagine so. Well, now knowing that, I can have an understanding of what challenges your grandfather did face and your father when making their selection. So, as y'all started looking for heat adaptation, were there certain breeds that just shone through, or was it still throwing darts at the board and hoping you land on the right one?
Yeah, so we had tried various things previous to this as well, and there wasn't really anything that my granddad or my dad particularly liked. So we had tried what guys typically run to, in the late 80s and 90s when they start looking for some heat resistance. And we had, a little bad experience with Brahman cross, and that was a totally different time period back then. There's some good genetics out there now. Um, and we started looking at like some Thule and Star, and the South Pole was on our radar for a little bit. And then we came across this little breed of cow called Mashona from Africa. And it offered something that we feel is really unique to the US. They're a unmolested breed, so to speak. They've not been messed with by man and ruined what's made them special. Kind of like the resilienceness and hardiness of a Corriente, but they have high heat and humidity tolerance, and also they're extremely parasite resistant. And then what kind of pushed them over the top for us was their docility overall. along with a inherently extremely fertile on low octane forages. And they have really good carcass traits on top of all of that. They are a little smaller animal naturally because, nature tends to favor a little bit smaller animal in these high stress environments. So that's what's led us to work on creating a composite that offers all of these benefits of the Mashona, but in something that's going to be a marketable package when you take something to the sale barn. And that's ultimately why we ended up going with this composite, because we didn't really see anything that was going to fit all the criteria that we needed for what we were trying to do.
Okay, well, what flavor composite are we talking about?
Yeah, so it's a Mashona primary composite. It's probably going to fall somewhere around 5/8 Mashona. And then the other portion of that is Angus. And then there's going to be a hint of Beefmaster, last year Beefmaster at the end, probably around an 8.
All right. I was hoping you would say proprietary, but
Yeah, I don't mind sharing it all. I think everyone is going to end up having a little bit different composite if they go down the composite route for their particular environment.
if they do it right.
If they do it right, yeah. Because if we were further south, it would change a little bit. If we were further north, it would change a little bit.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, our environment is kind of strange. I feel like if we had stayed in Kansas, we would have been a lot better off because Kansas is a wonderful cattle country. And here, we don't freeze solid in the winter, so it just turns to mud. And we get the majority of our rainfall in the non-growing season when we don't need it.
No.
So it's just kind of a unique, challenging environment. Everyone's environment is unique and challenging, but they all have varying degrees of challenge, I would say.
Well, Matt, before we get too deep into the grass and y'all's relationship with it, I'd like to back up. I stated earlier in your intro that y'all's relationship with Johann Zietsman's teachings is quite notable. I'd like to see what y'all's main takeaways from that are.
Sure. So like I said, Dad originally started doing some stealth grazing back in the 90s. And he was self-taught for a lot of that. It was just through trial and error, trying to find what worked in our environment, in our situation, and our land. And as he progressed and started putting, more paddocks in and rotating them more frequently, we eventually got to the point where we were trying, 12 moves a day, a whole bunch of just kind of out there things to see what really worked well in our environment. And then Dad came across Man Cattle and Bells by Mr. Zietsman. And that's really what kind of put everything together and set us on this path that we're currently on with ultra high density grazing. His book explained to us finally why all of the things that we had tried previously as far as different breeds go wouldn't have ever worked for what we're trying to do in our environment, because we were trying to fit a square peg through a round hole, more or less. And it's what made everything click and why the inputs kept getting higher and the margins were getting lower. We were fighting against nature. And that's really that book. And it's what really finally put everything together for us and why we were having, the issues that we were having, and then how to also get around those and work with nature instead of fighting against it.
Yeah, I can see that definitely being the case. I mean, some of the largest takeaways from his work are his profit per acre philosophies and his fertility first, and everything you've spoke on so far fits with that. So I imagine when that book was picked up, it was an aha moment in what y'all were already seeking.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was a revelation that, the answer was right there in front of us, but sometimes we just have to be shown it to realize what it is that we're looking at.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it was.
Okay. Well, could you speak a little further on what y'all's relationships and the living of those principles has transformed y'all's place into?
Sure. So by doing the ultra high density grazing, it's a twofold effect. First, it increases our profitability because we're able to run more animals on the same amount of land. And not only that, we're able to graze way further into the year without hay. And at this point, we only keep hay for our weaned calves, and we also keep about 30 to 45 days supply for cows at the end of their third trimester, because that's running up just about the time where the nutrition is ramping up again, but also our stockpile quality gets decreased pretty substantially at that point. So we try to keep a little buffer there for them just in case. And then the ultra high density grazing, the beauty of it is it also highly encourages the animals to be successful that are most adapted to your environment. And one of the ways that it does that is by moving them, about 4 times a day average. You get extremely high utilization out of the forage that's available. So in a sense, you're dramatically increasing your cow days per acre on the same amount of land. It's just you're getting more utilization out of it. And that allows you to stockpile the vast majority of your property for the non-growing season when you have to be feeding hay most of the time. And like I said earlier, it's really common practice here for guys to put hay up all summer and then turn around in October-ish and start feeding hay until April.
Yeah. I like that concept rather than, hey, I know I have 30 rolls. You have an additional 35 paddocks. And you know that each one of those can handle your cattle for so many days at its nutrient density. So
yeah,
I think that might be just as good, if not better.
Yeah, and so the thing for us too, so like for us in our herd size, if we were to feed a day's worth of hay, it's going to cost us several $100s. And if we go later on into the stockpile grazing and the forage quality has decreased considerably, that's getting into the point where, yes, we may need to give them a little bit of supplemental protein, but we're going to spend less than 10% on that protein source versus what we would spend on feeding hay. It's a tremendous cost savings to do it like this versus feeding hay.
Well, I know it's a faux pas in the cattle world for me to ask how many you have. It's like asking you to lay your bank account bare to me. But how large of a herd are we talking whenever we can understand, when you put it as simple as a 10% and you're understanding these cost savings, how large of a herd do y'all typically work with?
Yeah, so, prices are good. We've sold down a little bit, but right now we're sitting at about 140 mama cows. And without clearing any more land just on that 440 that we have, I think we can comfortably stock about 220 to 240-ish and still maintain just that 30 to 45 days worth of hay.
All right. Well, I know I have committed a faux pas there, so if you want to remove that at the end of this, I'm more than comfortable.
No problem at all. It's a really common question. And it gets kind of into the next thing when we talk about the grazing density and ultra high density grazing, what that actually means, what that looks like. So for us, we typically during the growing season, we'll graze the entire herd in most pastures less than an acre per day. And we'll move them roughly 4 times per day during that time span. So that puts our grazing density, depending on pastures, because every little paddock is different. Our grazing density will be anywhere between like 600,000 to 1 million pounds per acre. By having that smaller herd into a smaller size paddock, you're able to multiply the amount of animals that you have because you're concentrating them into your paddock.
I like that you noted that not all are the same. I'm just coming along to those concepts that not all grass is created equal, and it's not as simple as dividing your property into, 20 even segments. It's understanding that, okay, that bank of shade trees over there doesn't allow the same amount of coverage, or you're getting into this.
Right.
You're getting into this. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Even one side of the hill to the other is different because different grasses will grow on the north versus the south slope.
Yeah.
So that there's a lot of nuance to this, and there's a lot of stuff that guys kind of just have to figure out on their own. But we started out just like that. Dad kind of subdivided our pastures, and he just loosely rotated them through that, and that was how we initially kind of dipped our toes in to the region coming from a very conventional mindset.
Yeah. Well, I love that you just reflected that. I've got a note right here, and it's that I need to get you to speak about the regenerative mindset as a whole. And I was wondering if we maybe could cover some common misconceptions of the ideas of regenerative.
Sure, let's do it.
So, what would you say? I mean, it's obviously not just daily moves and multiple species or crossbreeding. What is it out there that sets it apart? And what are some common misconceptions?
Yeah, so I feel like to the conventional guys, the region is almost akin to being a dirty hippie. Uh, and I totally get that analogy because you do hear a lot of guys in the region movement saying stuff that aligns with kind of almost that hippie kind of movement. We're in tune with nature and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I get it. And what it really boils down to at the end of the day is if you're able to work with nature instead of against it, you're going to be a lot more profitable. And if we just start with the land itself, you start managing the land and you start being a grass farmer instead of just a cow man first. What you start doing is you're improving the land itself, so that's decreasing your input costs. And as you're improving the land, you're able to actually sustain more animals on the same amount of land. And granted, there's some wild claims out there about how much improvement you can make. But even if you just go from saying being a very conventional set stock rate where, you may rotate your cattle once or twice a year just to moving them, say once a week, you're going to see a tremendous improvement in your soil quality and your grass quality, just by not letting those animals selectively graze the best plants the majority of the year. You're going to see those really good plants that they like to choice out, spread, and multiply, and they're going to start taking over the bare patches that you might have. And by working with nature in that way, it rewards you with more profitability. So I think that's kind of the thing that the region guys don't like to lean into is the profitability side of it. Because there's some competing mindsets, it seems like to me, where profit is a dirty word, and so they don't talk about it. But we're in the cattle business, and we got to make a profit if we want to stay in business.
Well, it can feel good and still be profitable.
It can, absolutely. And there's a lot of good ideas on both sides that I think both sides are equally guilty about throwing the baby away with the bathwater, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate. It's because there are a lot of really good things from the conventional guys that maybe get tossed away just because someone may not like it. But say, for example, if you're just getting started and you've got a whole bunch of weeds and you've got say broom sage and you don't have a lot to work with there grazing based wise, that might be an instance where if you, as a one-time amendment, were to use some of the conventional methods available to you, you will speed up the process of being able to actually make that plant usable many times over how long it would take if you try to force it to happen with just animal impact.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I've heard you state before in another conversation that the land crowd and the cattle crowd are both fighting the same battle.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I like the fact that you've noted that any action with intention is in it at its root regenerative.
Regen can really just boil down to at its finest is you notice an improvement and you act upon that improvement and you reward it and you try to multiply it and create a self-sustaining effect so you don't have to continually put in inputs and decrease your profitability. And the issue I think that both cattlemen and then the region guys kind of face together collectively is we're fighting the same battle, but we're taking it different approaches to it. And we're all at the end of the day trying to make a profit, stay in business, and we're trying to hopefully pass something on to the next generation.
What would you say that the language associated with this is? It damning or is it encouraging?
with regen.
With all of it, regen, genetics, cattle, the two separate crowds.
Yeah, I think guys are fighting each other unnecessarily. Um, there's both sides have some valid points, but at the end of the day, we're all fighting the same fight, and it's just these two groups have taken two different early approaches, and they've decided that everything that the other side does is bad, and there isn't anything that we can learn from either side. The truth of the matter is, like with the conventional guys, if you were to just start rotating your cows once a week, you're going to see an immediate improvement to your forage quality and the carrying capacity of your land. That's it. If you just continue doing everything else you normally do, but just start rotating your cows a little bit, you're going to see an immediate impact and you're going to want to do more. And that's kind of the toe in the water thing that I think if most conventional cattlemen would just try, you're going to see an improvement. And if you do nothing more than that, you're going to increase your profitability because you're going to decrease the amount of hay that you have to use every year.
Yeah.
And then, like on the regen side, so the thing is, nature will always fix itself if you give it enough time. And unfortunately, man's time is really limited on Earth. And I know we all like to think that we have a long period of time, but the fact of the matter is that, and if we were to apply some of the things that sometimes on a one-time basis that regen guys would consider a no-no. So, some we've taken really extreme. They're against even brush hogging. So, I mean, there's really zealots on both sides, and that's unfortunate. And they're also the loudest too. I think there's probably a lot more common ground than what it seems like, especially online. But if we were to just use some of these tools that are available to us as a one-time single amendment, just to try to leapfrog the regen progress along a little bit, that would save years of trying to do things with nature's speed and nature's timeline.
Yeah.
Now, the only issue with that is if we start being dependent on those things. And then we get back into that cycle where we have to continually do these things, and that decreases our profitability. But there's a lot of things that I think that the regen side should look at as a way to, hey, this isn't what I want to do all the time, but this is a one-time amendment that I can do that will greatly increase what I'm trying to do with the property and decrease the amount of time it's going to take to get to where I ultimately want to be.
Yeah. I think, I hope I don't sidetrack you with this, but I think one of the biggest challenges for the regen side is seems to be a mindset of acceptance that it's not one size fits all. And it seems like a good portion of the industry likes the fact that you need cattle to gain weight, feed grain. You need your grass to grow taller, give fertilizer. That works anywhere, everywhere. And another half of the market accepts that what's working for my neighbor might not work for me, and I might have to invest some time and some experimenting.
Yeah. And so, that's coming from kind of a very commercial side of it to the more nuanced regen side of it. And, unfortunately, so the U.S. is huge, and we have such a variety of different environments that guys don't even realize that we have here. And we can go from a true tropical type environment, and that's going to require a different type of animal than you would have up north. And so what guys have ended up doing is they've tried to raise animals like they do up north, and it's made it to where guys have to make all these management concessions to fit that square into a round hole. And that's really kind of, I think, for guys in the Southeast in particular, we've kind of been fed this lie that Angus is what you got to have. And Angus is a fine animal in the right environment. But, there were three that originated where if it gets to 70 degrees, that's a heat wave. I mean, it rarely gets 70 degrees here at nighttime here during the summer. So that's not an ideal animal for our environment. And so that's led to a lot of guys trying to raise that type of animal, and then they make the management successions to make that animal be successful, which means they have to feed them. They have to feed them some grain, or they have to decrease their stocking rate so that animal can get what she needs. It's a larger animal that's too big for the environment, if I'm going to be honest. And I'm not saying we need to raise, 600-pound cows, but as you go south, mammals in particular, are naturally a little bit smaller. It's just a response to the environment. Um, so, here where I am, an 1,100-pound cow, that's a really reasonable sized animal.
Yeah.
And I know that may not be what guys up north want, and that's fine. It's a different environment that can support a different type of animal.
I've never
But guys
considered
really,
it from that side, Matt, that we as a whole could have slipped away from some principles that our grandfathers grasped because it was just
yeah,
a little slippery slope. It was, well, I want to get into these larger frame cattle. This is what's popular. This is what's selling. And they just can't quite make it here. So it's just a little bit of this. It's just a little bit of
yeah,
this. It's just a little bit. And before you know it, you're at a point of degradation and dependency.
yeah. Well, think about too, for a long time, guys in the South and Southeast, they had naturally smaller type animals here. I mean, that's the region, Corriente, the Piney Woods, Crackers, Longhorns, and those are bigger animals, but there's a lot of what you could almost say native breeds in the South, Southeast that are adapted really well for the environment, but they're not very commercially viable. And I think that's the issue of what looks commercially viable in sale barn doesn't necessarily look like a Oriente. It doesn't look like a Longhorn. So guys have kind of been forced to raise an animal to fit the market, but it doesn't fit their environment.
Yeah. Come to find out, those roping cattle could have been a lot more profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there are a lot of guys that will take, like a Corriente, and they'll put Charlet or something like that on them, and they'll top down a pretty decent looking calf and take it to the sale barn. And they'll make pretty good money doing that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why we started our composite that we've been working on, is because we wanted something that worked really well for our environment, but still had some commercial appeal left to it at the end of the day.
I like that.
And that's also why nothing that was really out there at the time fit for what we were trying to do, because we were trying to create that little efficient mono cow that will pass as some sort of Angus cross, but has all the fertility and all the hardiness and just the survivability of these swamp cows.
I like that. I like that. Put a little bit of weight, keep the black eye, and try and slip through the sale barn.
Yeah, yeah. And I power to the guys that want to do direct market on their beef. My dad's done that. I'm not wired that way. I would much rather prefer to, we have a 45-day calving season, and that means that all of our animals are weaned at the same time. So that means that we only do all of these management things once. So we wean everything once, and the stuff that we're not going to keep after the weaned, load them up, send them to the sale barn, we're done.
Yeah.
It makes life really easy.
Well, speaking on that, Matt, I've talked to quite a few people that operate in a similar fashion at this point, and that's something they all seem to note is people have such a mindset of what the work involved in conventional ranching is. And that already seems like such a monumental task. And then you talk about regenerative ranching and moving these cattle 3-4 times a day. And it sounds like, how are these people finding time to do this? Could you speak on what a day at your ranch is? I mean, others that I've spoken to say that they find more time with their family after making the shift in this direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can back up a little bit and give a full picture here. So growing up, what I knew of ranching and farming was you spent your days in the hayfield, and that was kind of it for the summer. And then, in between that, you do some cattle work where you need it. You may be having some cows calve or some stuff like that go on. But most of your day was dominated by hay. And then, fall would come around and you start feeding your hay. And then you'd have your fall calving season would begin. And that would stretch out as long as guys like. I know there's guys that do year-round calving, but there's always something going on with the conventional way of doing stuff. You're putting out fertilizer. There's always something, and it doesn't change with regen, but your time management and the things that you do, that does change. So we don't put up our own hay anymore, and there's no way we can justify even having the equipment for it. And it's way cheaper for us to buy the little bit of hay that we need. If you put pen to paper in our situation, the money that it would take just to purchase the equipment would provide our hay for many decades. So it doesn't make sense for us to put up our own hay and have our own hay equipment. We did for a long time. We had, 2 tractors and brakes and balers and, we did all of it, square bales, brown bales. We even had those giant bales that they have out west that my granddad thought that was the neatest thing. These giant bales that are about 6 feet tall, and I forget what kind of baler that's called, but he had the first one in the county when he got that. And we found out why no one else had it, and it's because
They're 3,000-pound bales.
They're really prone to being blown away since there's no wrap on them.
Oh.
They're just a hay stack, and they have to be moved with a trailer that's got a conveyor belt floor on it. So it was a it was a chore to put those bales out because they're 6 feet tall by I think they're about 8 feet wide, and they were, I say, 10 to 12 feet long. Just a huge, massive stack of hay.
Yeah, but Papa had the biggest bale in the county, didn't he?
He sure did, yeah. And, they were neat. I liked jumping on them as a kid. We got in trouble for jumping on them, of course, because they were prone to having the hay slough off if they got wet or something like that. So I'm glad we're not doing that anymore. And so going from that very conventional way of doing things where our time was eaten up with hay for the most part, and then in between the hay, we had all of our cattle stuff that we were doing. And then we also had chicken houses at the time too, because you got to have chicken houses so you can put litter out, so you can grow the grass.
You weren't raising chickens for the eggs. You needed their shit.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And we had to have that to keep our pastures going, our hay fields going. So everything that we were doing was essentially trying to artificially support the productivity of the pasture is what we were really doing.
So you bared the burden of all that.
Our family, everything that we did kind of went back towards trying to artificially support the productivity of the pasture.
Okay.
And then the shift region of that is you find a way to work with nature so the productivity of the pasture can remain very high, but the amount of work you actually put into it ends up being quite low compared to doing it very conventionally. And the way that we do that is with animal management and then by timing our rest and recovery of that land. And so my typical day during the growing season, I like to actually move the cows a little bit later, the first move of the day, let the dew burn off the ground. Not really any particular reason. It's just that's what works for me. It lets me get up, kind of do some paperwork, just whatever I need to do first thing in the morning. I'm not stressed about going to move cows.
You don't like wet socks. You can just say it.
Yeah, you're right. I don't want to get my feet wet. So, normally about 10 o'clock or so, 9, 10 o'clock, I'll do the first move on the cows. And after I move them, if I haven't already set up paddocks ahead of time, I'll go ahead and set up paddocks for the day or for several days. And that can take me, anywhere from, depending how many paddocks I set up, 10 minutes to an hour and a half. It just depends how many paddocks I want to set up at that time. And I try to have several paddocks set up ahead of time. And what that does is it helps me not have to fight fires to a sense. Because if I already have some of these things done ahead of time, I'm not stressed when something does come up unexpected, because I've already done a little bit of the groundwork ahead of time for myself. And there are technologies that are coming out there now, like automatic fence lifters and these wireless virtual fencing collars, that eventually, once we implement the virtual fencing collars, that's going to completely change what my day looks like entirely. I could be at the beach for all the cows know, and they'll take care of it. But yeah, so I'll move them about 4 times per day average, and that first moves at about 9 to 10 o'clock. And the spacing between those moves, it can vary a little bit, but typically my last move I like to have done in the growing season no later than 6 or 7 o'clock. So the other 2 moves, they just come in between that at some point. And it's just based on their gut feel and then the amount of forage that's left at that time. Sometimes I'll go out there and they've not cleaned up the paddock that they had, so they may get 3 moves. Or I'll go out there and they cleaned it up and they're still standing there and the gut feel isn't good, so they may get an extra move. It's just trying to keep the animals as full as possible and achieve as high amount of utilization as possible.
And that comes with a knowledge of what level you can take the ground down to and their impact on it, and it's still being able to cover at the proper rate.
Right. And so the recovery is always going to be different. And I think that's the trap that the region guys fall into is we want to have our 18, 24, 36 paddocks, all the same size. And then we want to come back to them exactly 35 days, every single paddock. And the reality is nature doesn't work that way. At least where I'm at, it doesn't work that way, because as your seasons change, your rainfall amounts change, how your grass recovers is directly related to your real world weather conditions. So sometimes, for example, where we are, we may have a pasture that's ready in 30 days, or it may be ready in 65 days. And it's totally dependent on the weather that we're having that year. So we don't do this rotation where it's a constant circle around our paddocks. What we do is we rotate back to our first paddock as soon as it's recovered enough to not actually be hurting the root reserves of the plant. And typically that's about the point those basal leaves are starting to turn yellow. And before, on warm season grasses, before they start to go to boot and the seed head production has begun. And it's really important for us in our environment to graze those plants, the warm season stuff, before it's gone to boot, because the nutritional quality of it drops so fast. And that's, nutrition is an issue here. And, our stockpile stuff, that can be really poor forage sometimes, like Bermuda and stockpile, that can get down to like 4% protein. So having animals that are really well adapted to their environment and nutritionally adapted to their environment and have a high degree of inherent body condition is extremely important because of those nutritional challenges.
Well, that flows well into my next question. I asked about how your day has changed through your management. How has your operation changed through your genetics? What freedoms has that allowed you?
Yeah, so animals there are adapted to their environment, and having a tight breeding season, that completely changes your management and your day-to-day life. So the more fit those animals are to your particular environment, wherever that is, the less management issues you're going to have. So for us, we're in a high parasite environment. We don't do any kind of parasite control to our animals. And we've gotten to that point over time. But since we don't have to do parasite control anymore, flies or fluke worms or any kind of internal parasites, that's one less thing that we have to do management wise. We don't have to be drenching our cows or doing any of that stuff that you guys typically do several times a year.
And that's no additional cost too.
Yeah, so it's that's money you're saving. A penny saved is a penny earned. So it's everything that we do essentially just tries to get things in line with nature as much as possible, and that ultimately ends up decreasing our inputs by doing so.
Yeah.
So we've got these animals that are extremely parasite resistant. That's one big change there. And then having the tight breeding season, that changes stuff dramatically coming from 2 breeding seasons that were 90 to 120 days.
That can only be achieved by truly fertile genetics.
Yeah, that was kind of hard. I can lie, that was hard to come from 2 breeding seasons that were 90 days apiece down to one single 45-day breeding season. That was difficult, but I would not go back to multiple breeding seasons for any amount of money at all. It just simplifies things so much. All of your animals are on the same nutrition plane. And in our environment, that's huge, because if you've got cows that are lactating, you've got cows that are dry, what do? Especially wintertime, you're going to be overfeeding something if you're set up like that. And then you've got all the animals that can be weaned at the same time. All of your cattle work can be done once, and it just dramatically decreases your amount of inputs that you do time-wise by having that single breeding season.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're talking about decreased workload. I've got to ask, do you have a set of pulling chains?
We do somewhere. Yeah, we've got a set somewhere.
And how often are those used?
They're pretty rusty, so that should be a pretty good hint about that.
Yeah.
We try to be as hands off on them as possible during calving. That is one time a year that I don't move them multiple times a day. We try to just let them be cows for that 45 days. And then the heifers calve in with the herd. They're not treated any different once they're bred. After breeding as yearlings, they get put into the main herd, and they stay there the rest of their life until they fall out.
Yeah. Well, at this point, Matt, I kind of want to ask if you have any industry reflections. We've done a lot to highlight where y'all are operating in a different capacity, and y'all are setting a new standard for what efficiency can be and what your relationship with it and the time investment can be. Is there anything else that you feel, if someone was thinking of making the change or just investigating some of these principles a little further, how are y'all different than the remainder of the industry? And how have y'all shifted away, and what are the common traps that people continue to fall in?
Yeah. So conventional guys, if you can just make that commitment to lightly rotating your animals, you don't have to move them 4 times a day like we do to see an improvement. It's just coming from set stock rate to a light rotation, you're going to see an improvement, and you're going to see a decrease to your inputs and your bottom line. And that's kind of going to be your toe in the water moment to start maybe rethinking some of the things that you thought about the dirty hippie movement of regen. Because, there are a lot of zealots out there, but there's a lot of really good stuff in there too. And what we've seen with what we're doing, we've seen our bare spots of ground just completely vanish. And so we don't have bare dirt anymore. Even on some of these spots that are really poor soil, it's finally covered up, and we've got grass everywhere. And not just grass, but we've also started to see some of our keystone native species return, like big blue stem and Indian grass and gamma grass, grasses that you don't see in cow pastures around here anymore. And that's solely because of the way that we've grazed and the way that we've managed, and we've tried to work with nature, and that's allowed these keystone species to return. And it just so happens that they're fantastic forage, and they're uniquely adapted to our particular environment. So that means that they're going to produce a lot of tonnage without any input from us because they're what's meant to be here. And that's kind of really, if conventional guys could just start thinking about it like that, like regen is a way essentially to work with nature while decreasing your inputs and increasing your profitability. That's it.
I have
You're
another.
working with.
I'm sorry. I have another thing of
Okay.
note. You know, there's a lot of focus on drought resistance right now in the world of cattle, and people think that that's just a genetic approach as well. That can also be handled through management. I mean, I imagine
Absolutely.
that after a generation of working your land in this way, your property has a completely different relationship with rainfall.
Yeah. So our soil has become extremely spongy, and it soaks up all of the rain that we get. We have several, essentially, what are little pit ponds that my granddad built that no longer are remaining full because we're catching all of the runoff that those pit ponds were reliant on to stay full. So we're retaining essentially all of the moisture that we get. So that helps the drought resistance, but also the way that we graze, since essentially during the growing season, for example, uh, this past growing season, the entire herd only grazed about 70 acres during the growing season. So that means everything else is sitting there in stockpile or is drought reserve if we do end up with a drought. And a couple of years ago, we had a really bad drought. It was a D4 drought. And we continued to graze. We didn't have to destock. We didn't have to go buy a bunch of hay. We just kept grazing. It was just another summer for us.
And it wasn't
And
to the detriment of your property.
no, because we had set so much of our land aside for stockpile because we didn't have to graze it because of the way that we're grazing with ultra high density grazing, we're able to get higher utilization out of our forage base. And that slows down your rotation with your cattle. So by slowing down like that, that naturally as a consequence ends up where you have a large drought reserve and a large amount stockpiled for grazing in the non-growing season. So droughts aren't something that we worry about anymore.
Well, Matt, it may be a little off and you may not be comfortable with this question, but at what point, when you make the shift from a conventional setting, if we were to offer encouragement to any listener out there, you know, especially someone like myself, I've got a pasture out here that is far gone. It's hard packed. It doesn't utilize rainfall well, and I managed it poorly, and I managed my cattle on it poorly. If I were to try to move to these systems, could the cattle not be a tool of improving the land and bringing me to a point where I could eventually participate in some of this high density grazing?
Absolutely. Yeah. So cattle are ultimately, at the end of the day, they're a tool that we use to manage the land. And, it's also how we make our profit, but they're ultimately the tool that we use to manage the land and to work with nature to mimic natural systems as much as we can. And that's a really good example of what you just said of where some of the conventional things that guys would do could be used to leapfrog your progress. And you could absolutely do it with cattle alone. But, most operations starting out, they don't exist after 5 years. So if we can do some of these things at the very beginning as a one-time thing, just to increase our productivity from the start, and then step in with our regen practices to maintain that and then to increase it without having to do those initial inputs again. I think that's the ideal mix. And it's a really good approach because man's time is very limited and nature will ultimately fix most of these things one way or the other. I mean, they'll have a succession of species, then they'll turn into woods. Or if the animals are left intact on the environment, they will continue and it will ultimately end up being a really self-sustaining, beautiful grassland ecosystem. It's just kind of up to us how that ends up panning out.
Yeah, and the time frame of which we achieve these things.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of the sticking point with a lot of this stuff is our time is really limited. And we've got, for example, we have we call them silvo pastures It's kind of like a savanna type thing, loosely with trees that we've been working on. And we've got about 80 acres set up really well on that at this point. And one of them we've done totally regen, and it's coming along, and we've got a lot of good native species coming along in there, but the productivity of it is still pretty low compared to our established pastures that we've been working on for a really long time. And these pastures, the silva pastures, we've only been working on them for about 4 years. And the productivity of them is maybe 20 to 30% of our established pastures. And if we were to go in, I think that's what we're going to do on this other silvo, this other 40 acres. We're going to go in, we're going to do a little bit of a burn, and we're going to do some broadcasts to go ahead and establish some plants that we can graze immediately and get good utilization out of it. It just makes sense, some of these things, because nature and cattle management would eventually turn that into really good silvo. But
you can speed it up.
We'd like to speed that along.
I follow that, Matt. So adding some forage, you imparting forage allows you to utilize the tool of cattle to then take that 20% and speed it up and eventually get it to where it's at the same yielding power of the remainder of your land.
Right. Because, they've got to have something to eat there. And in our environment, so like that silva in particular, it's a lot of green sage. And if we graze it at the right stage, they'll eat it. But if you graze it at the right stage, you're also going to be killing all of the good plants that you really want to be there too. So it's kind of this catch-22 thing where we're stuck in the situation where we do a little bit of an amendment at the very beginning, and it just incrementally speeds things along, or we take the slow route and we lose profitability and the productivity of that land until it eventually turns around. And like I said previously, most guys, they don't have nearly as much time as they think they do. So if they can just take a little bit of the conventional stuff at the very beginning just to speed things along, then they're going to be better off for it long term.
Absolutely. And not just in what they're going to rewards they will reap, but in the cost reduction and time investment and all of it.
Right.
Well, Matt, to round this thing out, is there anything that I haven't brought about or that hasn't come up naturally that you feel the listener would be amiss if we didn't talk about?
Did we cover cattle selection very much there, or?
We didn't. We talked about the cattle that work within your systems, but we didn't really just hold cattle in their own regard. If you would like to, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So a little bit about our cattle operation. Like I said previously, we have a 45-day breeding season, and we breed all of our females that are exposed yearlings. And we go by Johann Zietsman's 2-3 principle. So all of our bulls that we would select have to be from these 2-3 females that have calved every time they've been able to since they were 2. And that's really hammering home the adaptation to your environment and the fertility and the inherent body condition behind that. And not every animal that comes from a 2-3 female is worthy of keeping in the herd, and that's just part of it.
Can you break that down for me? A 2-3 female?
Yeah, so a 2-3 female is a female that you exposed as a yearling, and then she calves as a 2, and then she breeds back as a 2 while she has that calf inside and she's cutting her teeth.
Okay, so as others have stated, they have to be able to eat for 3.
Yeah, to be able to eat for 3 from a very young age.
Okay.
And they have to be able to maintain their body condition well enough to raise a marketable calf and get bred back and then do it again. And what we found, and through Mr. Zietsman, that is one of the most difficult things for a cow to do, is to be able to breed as a yearling and then have a calf, raise a marketable calf, and then breed back without any assistance from yourself.
Not degrading in body condition and also weaning a good calf.
Yeah, they need to be able to raise a marketable calf. And We expect them to lose a little bit of body condition, but they need to maintain enough that they are able to breathe back quickly in that 45-day time span. Because, we give them just a little bit of slack because they're cutting their teeth and they're raising the calf, and it should be a good calf. And that's just a really stressful time in general for that young of an animal to be doing that. But, we don't want them slipping and be looking like rags or anything. But, typically we've seen if the animal stays just completely butterball fat, they're probably not raising that great of a calf. With the amount of stress that we put on with their just selection and the amount of inputs that we give them. So we like them to be like a condition 5-ish. And I feel like that's a really good blend of raising a marketable calf and keeping your body condition to do it again the next year.
Yes, sir. Well, anything else of note when it comes to cattle selection alone? I imagine, paint a picture for me. What is the conformation of cattle that work within your system? I imagine a big Springer rib is a factor that plays in with the ability to have that forage conversion.
Yeah, so like I said, most of our females are going to be around 1050, 1100 pounds. And they're, a little small frame animal, but they've got great gut capacity. They've got that red solo cup look to them, where they've got that nice reverse wedge. They've got the U neck and just really feminine, hormonally balanced features about them. Almost kind of an elegant look to them. You can look across the pasture and the bulls are really easy to identify because they don't look anything like the cows at all. We've really focused on having that high degree of sexual dimorphism and that hormonal balance that comes with that. And that's another thing that happens by doing the 2-3 principle. You can visually look at an animal and tell if they've had a calf or not because of the things that happen with the animal and the hormones that are shut on and off during puberty and pregnancy. So their bone growth signals, the hormones that cause the legs to either continue to grow or stop growing, and it affects visually how that animal looks because bone growth has stopped. So it's really apparent on these animals the hormonal balance that they have and how it ties into their inherent body condition and just how they work in our system.
Well, Matt, I've got to ask: is it what matters more to you, the bloodline or the bull?
So your bull is the tool that you use to pass on your best female's genetics. So at the end of the day, those cow families are most important to me. And what we've seen is our best females in a herd trace back to just a handful of cows. So the bull is essentially a tool to spread your best female's genetics as far as you possibly can.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I have to ask, because this podcast is brought to you by Boss Sires, and we're all about sustainable, adaptable genetics. Just how many blue ribbon winners do you have out there?
There's not a single one in either our bull paddock or our female herd. All of these are hardworking commercial females because show genetics aren't hardworking and they're not certainly commercially profitable.
What leads you to those conclusions?
So show genetics, you have these androgynous looking animals that from a distance you can't tell if they're male or they're female. And they require a level of input that isn't profitable for the commercial cattlemen. In our operation, we need low input animals that work in our particular environment. And the show genetics have wrecked many of first-time cattlemen just getting into it because those genetics simply don't work in a commercial setting.
I don't understand that. I mean, a cow's job is to eat grass and make babies. You mean to tell me in an operation such as yours, where the grass is abundant, there's so much of it that you're rushing cattle through 3 or 4 different paddocks of 2-foot tall grass each day, that something coming out of the show ring wouldn't have the ability to eat enough to maintain condition and come into calf within your 45-day window?
No, there's no way that you take a conventional show winner from the state fair here and you put them into our system, and they're either going to starve to death because they're over milking and they would require inputs to support that animal and the calf, or they're simply just not going to be able to breed back because their body condition has suffered so much. And, it's not saying that we just absolutely dog our cattle to death. Their body condition is extremely important to us, but we've worked really hard to create genetics that work in our environment and can maintain that body condition on their own without us having to baby them to make sure that they can breed or, support their calf.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I have to apologize. I was obviously being facetious in my last statement, but I feel that that's a great segue. Comparatively, your genetics versus what's commercially available leaving the U.S. and going to tropical environments. I mean, pick a South American country. What do you think would make it and why?
Oh, man. So I feel like us cattlemen here in the U.S., we've got a heavy burden on our shoulders, and we need to do better by the rest of the world. And what I mean by that is, if you look at some of these South American countries, for example, they're not worried about blue ribbons. They want to feed people. And at the end of the day, cattle are a protein source, and they have to be able to replicate themselves on a yearly basis. And it is not uncommon at all for in some of these countries that they're telling them that they need to feed grain to get these animals to be able to reproduce, or that it's not uncommon and normal for them not to calve every year. And that's simply not acceptable. We need to start just face the reality that we've kind of screwed up. Animals absolutely, especially in these tropical environments, there's no reason at all they shouldn't be able to have a calf every year within a reasonable intercalving period. And there's no reason at all that they should have to do it with grain. It's simply not true.
Well, Matt, would I shock you if I told you that a lot of these producers in these tropical environments or South American environments outside of the U.S. are convinced that they have poor forage quality?
Yeah, I mean, so that's the thing with high rainfall environments is you have a lot of green there, and depending on where you're at, the quality of it may be pretty poor compared to like a cool season forage. So they do require a different type of animal to be successful in that environment. And that's going to be an animal that looks a lot different from Angus. I hate to say it, but that's the truth. So, up north, they've got really rich, wonderful cool season forages that are extremely nutritious, even when they've gone to seed. And so here for us down here in the South, we actually purposefully will wait to graze the little bit of cool season flush that we have until it's starting to go to food and to seed, because that allows the fiber content of that plant to go up enough where cattle get better utilization of it, and they don't just poop it all out the back end instead. And our warm season forages that we have here, and as you go further south, they are particularly adapted to survive these high heat environments. So they naturally have a higher ligand content, and the forage quality of it is lower. And that's fine. It just means you need an animal that's adapted to that type of forage. So if you're trying to take XYZ or whatever into that environment where they're not going to be set up for success to start with, that's just it's a train wreck waiting to happen.
Yeah.
And
well, to add on your statement there, I think it's crazy that we live in a day and age where so many people can lean into an EPD and accept the value of a feed conversion metric. But then that same person has a hard time with the idea of a cattle with the adaptation of forage conversion and their ability to convert different types of forage and nutrient levels.
Yeah, EPDs are absolutely worthless. I mean, they're not even worth the paper that they're printed on. Especially if you're trying to compare across environments and across birds. It's ridiculous. If you have an animal that is able to calve every year and raise a marketable calf, and well, I mean, what really more do you ask for? I mean, that animal does exactly what you're asking for. She raises a marketable calf. She's low maintenance. You don't have to put a whole bunch of inputs at her for her to be productive. I mean, what more do you want?
I need 5 more lines to put in the sale catalog is what I want.
Well, you know, that's unfortunate. But these countries that are just trying to feed people, they don't need all that nonsense. They need an animal that's going to raise a calf every year with low inputs that you're not going to have to throw a bucket of feed at to get her to breed and to raise a calf. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's really what all of us should be looking for, is to have that animal that can support herself with as few inputs as possible. And, you know, when we start straying away from the confines of what our environment allows, that's when we'd have to start opening the pocketbook up to try to fill those voids that we've created by having animals that are a poor match to the environment we put them in. It's not the animal's fault, it's man's fault for putting those animals in a system and an environment where they're not set up for success.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's imagine cattle had name brands. You know, the different breeds were a different name brand. Are you a name brand guy or are you a task focused guy? If Mashona wasn't here today, but you were on the hunt for cattle to operate within your system, would it matter to you what flavor, what brand they were? Or would it be more the goal they could achieve?
Yeah, it wouldn't matter anymore. It would be about finding that animal that is best adapted to my environment as possible, but will still produce a product that meets my end goal. So for us, you know, that's sending stuff to the sale barn. And for someone that may be doing direct market, that end product is going to look a little different than what ours does. And we're trying to tiptoe that line a little bit of having that really nice sale barn calf, but still raise an animal that fits in our environment. And so that would lead us to, you know, creating a composite ultimately of, you know, 3 or 4 different breeds.
Yeah. Well, anything else you'd like to add before I ask my final question of you?
All right. I think I would just be rabbit hole chasing if I added anything else.
Okay. Well then, Matt, I've got to ask my final question of you. I've enjoyed everything we've done so far, but what do you feel the moral obligation of the cattleman is to the land, the cattle, and future generations?
Yeah, so we're called to be good stewards of the land. And by managing the cattle and keeping their welfare in mind, we're able to be good stewards of the land. And that ensures that hopefully there will be something to pass on to the next generation. So, you know, the way that I see it is by using these regenerative practices, we're able to restore a lot of the things that necessarily weren't considered previously through other forms of management. For example, we have greater biodiversity than I remember growing up by leaps and folds. The turkey are tremendous. The deer population has exploded. We have quail again. All the creepy crawly stuff. There's just millions upon insects out there. If you go out in the morning and the dew's still out there, you can see spider webs all over the pastures. Just the biodiversity by using these regenerative practices has multiplied many times over. And so that's one key aspect of it there, is respecting that ecosystem and trying to find a way that we can fold what we're doing into that and be good stewards of the land and encourage it to be a self-sustaining thing as much as possible. And that ensures that we're also hopefully leaving something behind for the next generation that they can come on and they can improve upon that. And, the cattle are key to all of that. They're the tool that we use to replicate these natural processes and to make these improvements to the soil that ultimately end up creating a stronger ecosystem overall for the entire place. And it also is a byproduct. It's high quality beef, excellent protein to feed people. Um, I think it's just our job as cattlemen just to be good stewards of the land and of the animals and try to feed our communities while we're at it.
Matt, I like that. And, I enjoy cattle, and I really hold you guys in very high regard in y'all's care for them. But every time I ask that question, and I get a lot of similar answers, there's a lot of passion there. And one of mine comes out, I'm a hunter. And I don't know how anybody who is a hunter couldn't hear you guys speak and get excited, because you're not only creating a great place to raise cattle and a viable product, but the byproduct of that is wildlife habitat as well.
Absolutely. So
And,
those long rests.
and you're preserving that for the next generation. I mean, there's a lot of conservation work for wildlife that happens in the woods, but everybody forgets that wildlife goes into the pasture as well.
Absolutely. And there's a diversity of species that are just grassland type animals.
Absolutely.
There's several species of bird, for example, that they can't tolerate. I think it's 1 cedar per acre. And that encroachment of cedar into the grassland habitats is devastating to that species. So the grasslands are a keystone environment, you could say. And there are a plethora of animals that can only be found in those grassland environments or the margins of those grassland environments.
Yeah. Well, there's other little silly things you can remark over the generations and having property that's ever improving like y'all's. Do you find your place to be any cooler than your father or you remember as a child? Because isn't it for every foot of standing grass in a grassland environment, your ground temperature can drop? I don't recall. I mean, this is off the top of my head. Something like 5 degrees seasonally than other average areas in your region. I mean, it's the very reason why there's some hillsides that you feel like you're walking across a grave and you get that chill. It's because the soil is so healthy there and the grass is in a relationship and releases moisture at the right time of day that you truly get a chill. It's just a temperature change through that region, right?
Yeah. So as the soil improves and it opens up and it becomes more spongy and the nitrogen gas exchange, that cycle is kind of restarted and the soil actually starts to breathe in a sense. And you can see that exchange happen certain times of day actually. And Jim Elizondo, he talks about that. He's got a great thing. He talks about how you can almost see that the land breathe at certain times of the day. And there's definitely some really cool things that we've seen. Like we've seen some of what were seasonal wet natured creeks are year-round creeks now. And we've seen spots that they never had any kind of water there. They've got water now. And, like we said, we've got some spots that we kind of relied on for water that are no longer getting water because we're sucking up all the water that falls. We don't have the runoff anymore. So that's created really clean streams. And we've got streams that flow to a river that kind of splits our property. And there's a kind of a rare species of fish there in that river that runs next to us. And the game and fish guy said that this is the healthiest population of this rainbow darter that they've found so far. And I like to think that part of it's because we have so little runoff going into our section of the river.
Hippie.
It's got to help. I mean, anything that we can do that's just we're not really going out our way to do these things. It's just a byproduct of our management.
Yeah, you're just a new age hippie.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I haven't started running around with my shoes off all the time yet. But,
I like it, man. Well, I'm sorry I took us down that tangent. I just really liked your answer to my question, and it inspired all those thoughts. Matt, thank you for your time on today and coming on and talking about your family's movement and how y'all are truly making it where this can go to the next generation and improving y'all's land for your enjoyment and future generations.
Happy to be here, Patrick.
Well, guys, thank y'all for listening, and don't forget to follow us and share. That's the only way this message gets out there, is through people like you sharing it and being inspired by it. And don't forget to ranch with purpose
and to breed for the future.
Thank you for tuning in to Sustainable Stock, Reviving Legacy Genetics. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share. Join us next time as we continue exploring the legacy and future of cattle ranching. For more information, visit us at bosssires.com. That's BOSSIRES.com. Or connect with us on Facebook. Until then, stay rooted in common sense and connected to the herd.